The cruelest part wasn't that Lime accused Olivia of cheating. It was how certain he sounded when he said it. No questions, no hesitation, no grief. Just cold, calculated rejection. He wanted her to feel ashamed, confused, and desperate enough to accept whatever story he gave her. But Olivia knew the truth inside her own body. She knew whose child she was carrying, and when the DNA test finally confirmed what she had known all along, Lime's accusation stopped being a wound. It became proof that his betrayal had never been emotional. It had been planned.
The first words from my husband, when I said I was pregnant, were, "This project is no longer viable." Then he shut me down. I only understood when I was sleeping in my car. He wasn't just ending our marriage. He was liquidating our entire life, and he'd been planning it for a while. Imclo, and I appreciate you listening. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I love to see how far these stories go. People say you can feel a marriage failing. They talk about a distance in the bed, a silence that's heavier than any argument, the moment he stops asking about your day. But when you inside it, you make excuses for the quiet. You tell yourself it, just stress from a deal falling through. You call it burnout. You say it's just a down round. I called it all those things, and it almost destroyed me. But in a strange twist, it helped me reclaim a part of myself. I thought I'd lost forever. My name is Chloe Wallace, and I was married to Mark Wallace for 7 years. We lived in a beautiful Victorian in San Francisco as Pacific Heights, the type of home featured in design magazines. We had the perfect friends and hosted perfect dinner parties. I am an interior designer. Mark is a venture capitalist. On paper, we were the definition of a power couple. We were that couple people admired, whispering, "They have absolutely everything." But paper doesn't tell the whole story. Looking back, the first crack appeared about a year before everything shattered. Mark started taking these latter-night founder calls on a burner phone he kept in his briefcase. I walked in on him one time. His back was to me, and he hung up so fast he almost fumbled the phone. He just smiled, claiming it was a stealth mode startup. "It was a sensitive work matter," he said, then kissed my forehead. And I was naive enough to believe every word. Then our finances started to feel off. Mark always handled the money, he was the expert, right? I gave him complete control. But soon he was restructuring our portfolio for a new fund, funneling my design firm's earnings into a new holding company only he could access. He'd show me pitch decks that looked slick, but were deliberately opaque. It was for our future, he promised. At the same time, he started making weird comments about fiduciary duty, asking me hypotheticals. "What do you think is the ultimate betrayal of trust?" he'd ask. Even Grant was my first husband. We married when we were very young. I was 21, he was 24, and we split up after 2 years. It was amicable, a mutual recognition that we wanted very different things. No drama, no messy fights. He moved to Seattle to be a tech journalist, and we simply lost touch. I hadn't spoken to Evan in nearly a decade, so when I found a $100 charge for a piece of art from a private gallery, my blood ran cold. When I asked him about it, he said I was overreacting. It was for a new office lobby, a business expense. I figured he was just overworked. I thought maybe my own growing success was making him feel insecure. I told myself we would work through it, and I tried to forget it. I was 9 weeks pregnant when my entire reality fell apart. I'd taken 3 tests at home before my doctor called with the official confirmation. I was thrilled and also terrified. It wasn't exactly planned, but we both knew this was our next step. I honestly believed Mark and I were ready for a family. I came home that evening with a small gift box. Inside was a tiny custom-made architect's scale ruler and our first ultrasound picture. I can remember every single second of what happened next. Mark opened the box. He saw the little ruler. He looked at the photo. Then he set them both on the counter with the slow, detached calm of a man killing a deal. Then looked directly at me, his eyes completely empty, and said the 7 words that will follow me for the rest of my days. I am dissolving this entity, effective immediately. I laughed. I actually let out this dry, stunned laugh, thinking it had to be some kind of sick joke, a terrible, cruel joke. But his face was made of stone. He said it again. He accused me of having an affair for months. He told me to be gone from his house by the next morning. When I tried to talk to him, to touch his arm, he recoiled as if I were poison. By midnight, I was in my car at a scenic overlook, the gift box on the seat next to me, trying to figure out how my life had just been so completely demolished. I sat for hours with the car off, asking myself the same thing again and again. What kind of man, after 7 years of marriage, learns his wife is pregnant and decides, with absolute certainty, that the baby cannot possibly be his? I had no answer, but a cold, rational part of my brain was already starting to connect the dots. I stayed in my car the whole night. It's not like in the movies, with some big dramatic breakdown. I just sat there, the biting San Francisco fog swirling around the car, a chill that gets right into your bones. I was too shocked to feel anything besides a deep, hollow emptiness. I just sat there. The city lights twinkled below. I watched cars drive by on the bridge. Just a normal Tuesday night for everyone else, but it felt like I was on another world. Around 2 a.m, I did an inventory. I had a couple $100 in my wallet. Every other cent I had ever earned was tied up in that holding company that Mark controlled. My laptop was in that house. My design portfolios, my client contracts. My whole business was on a server in that home office. My health insurance was through Mark's venture firm. I was 9 weeks pregnant, with no insurance, no access to my money, and no key to my own home. And then I realized I was holding the one clue Mark was betting I would never put together. The thought hit me with a sudden chilling clarity. The expensive art piece. It wasn't for an office. Mark wasn't a man ruled by jealousy. He was a venture capitalist. He didn't operate on emotion. He operated on due diligence. His entire life was about spotting a bad investment and writing it off before it could cause any more damage. The accusation had nothing to do with me. It was a preemptive move. He was projecting his own guilt onto me. The only reason to accuse your pregnant wife of cheating is if you're the one with a secret. I pulled out my phone and remembered our shared cloud account. He'd been so meticulous about everything else, but he forgot to revoke my access. I logged in and found a folder labelled Palo Alto Property. Inside were architectural plans for a new house, invoices for furniture I recognised. And in a subfolder called Personal, there was Mark, arm in arm with another woman. And hanging on the wall behind them was the exact art piece from the invoice. Did Mark know that I didn't? And for how long had he known it? I didn't get a wink of sleep. Around 5 a.m, I walked into a 24-hour cafe on the Embarcadero and ordered a coffee I never touched. I just sat in the booth, letting my thoughts race. By sunrise, I had the rough blueprint of a plan. First, I needed to get back into that house and get my things. My passport, my social security card, my laptop, and the design server with all of my work. They belonged to me. Mark couldn't legally keep them, but I knew he would try to. Second, I had to hire a lawyer before I did anything else, not just any lawyer. I needed someone who knew about complex financial holdings, who could explain my rights to that holding company, and if Mark could legally kick me out of our shared home. I was almost certain he couldn't. I needed to be sure. Third, I had to call my doctor. I was 9 weeks pregnant with no health insurance. I needed medical help right away. And fourth, the part that felt both terrifying and critical, I had to understand why Mark was suddenly so fixated on Eve and Grant. Because if Mark had been digging into my ex-husband's past, then his accusation wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. It was a calculated move. Why would a man make up a reason to throw his pregnant wife onto the street? The answer was horrifying, but it made a cold, logical kind of sense. Because he wanted his wife out of the picture, before something happened that would give her a permanent stake in something he wanted all to himself. I held the cold coffee cup in my hands. I was no one's fool. I built my career on understanding how layouts, materials, and light combine to create a space, and I could see the blueprint for his betrayal. Mark saw a big win on the horizon, something connected to this other woman, and he tried to cut his losses before the IPO. The baby just forced him to move faster. That had to be the answer. But he made one huge mistake. He acted too fast, too cruelly. A man with a perfect plan doesn't just invent an affair and have the locks changed. He panicked. And a panicked exit always leaves loose ends. I left a $5 bill on the table, put on my coat, and walked out into the sharp San Francisco air, feeling something I did not expect, focused. Not okay, not even remotely safe, but focused. Like a designer who finally sees the finished room in her mind, I finally saw the whole design. I knew which elements were structural and which were just window dressing. I got into my car, opened my contacts, and found the name Jessica Pierce, a shark of a family law attorney met at a Women in Tech gala. I had her personal number because she'd once mentioned hiring my firm to design her new offices. It was barely 7 a.m. I sent the message anyway. Jessica, it's Chloe Wallace. I need to see you today if you have any time. It's an urgent personal matter. So sorry for the early text. Her response came back in less than 5 minutes. I'll push my 9 o'clock. Be here at 8:30. I took a slow breath. The plan was just an outline, but a blank floor plan is where every great design begins. Albright's office was in a historic brownstone on Beacon Hill. A world I'd designed for clients, but never felt I belonged in. Her assistant led me to a library with floor-to-ceiling books that smelled of old leather and money. I was wearing the same clothes from yesterday. I hadn't slept at all. I'd bought a new shirt at a CV's just to feel human. Mez Albright walked in exactly at 9 a.m., set a single folder on the mahogany desk, and looked at me with eyes that saw everything. Start from the beginning, she said. Don't leave anything out, so I told her. Took notes on a yellow legal pad, letting me talk until the whole ugly story was out. When I finally fell silent, she put the cap back on her pen. All right, let's deal with the immediate fires, she said. The brownstone is in both your names. It was. He cannot legally change the locks. That's an illegal eviction. We'll file for immediate reinstatement. Now, your joint bank accounts. Has he touched the money since last night? I had no idea. Check now, she insisted, sliding her laptop over. I logged on $650. 2 days ago, it was over $90,000. I pushed the laptop back. My hand felt oddly calm. He took everything last night, I said. Miss Albright's face didn't change. but she started writing again. Bring up the transaction log. I did 2 massive wire transfers, both sent around 2 a.m. after he'd had thrown me out, to a holding company I'd never heard of that dissipation of marital assets, she said flatly. It's more than enough for an emergency court order to freeze everything he owns. How long have you been married? 6 years. Always here in Massachusetts. Yes, good. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. He doesn't get to just steal the family money. Looked up from the pad. Okay, now tell me about your husband, so. I told her about Leo and all the strange comments he'd been making for months. She listened, her focus absolute. So you believe your husband Leo learned about your father's estate and decided to throw you out before you could claim your inheritance. She said it so plainly. I guess that's what I am saying, I whispered. It's not a guess, she corrected. It's a motive. And if we can prove it, this stops being a simple divorce. She leaned forward. You need to contact the state bar. Find a probate attorney who handles complex estates. To find out if your father, Richard Vance, left a will or a trust that includes you. Don't ask directly. A good probate lawyer will know the right channels. I nodded, starting my own list. And Maya, I want you to document everything. Every single text, every email. Download bank statements, investment reports, anything you can access. Screenshot it all and send it to a new email account Leo knows nothing about. Do you have one? I did. An old one from grad school. That is your new life, she said, starting now. I left her office an hour later holding a plan, and for the first time in days I felt like I could breathe. I had a purpose. The Boston wind off the harbour was sharp, the kind of cold that wakes you up. I found a small cafe and started working. I sent the screenshots to my private email. I detailed the wire transfers. I called the bank's fraud department, reported the withdrawals as unauthorized, and demanded an account freeze, using the exact legal phrasing as Albright gave me next. I had to find my father's family. I remembered he had a son, my half-brother Ethan. Found him on a professional networking site. Same name, same sharp jawline as my father, just younger. I sent a message, explaining I was Maya, Richard S. daughter, and that I needed to ask about his estate for a pressing legal matter. I admitted how strange this must sound. He replied within an hour, with a phone number. His voice was guarded. Maya, our father passed away 2 months ago. Aneurysm. He was only 61. He paused. His estate lawyers have been trying to find you for weeks. Why are you only calling now? I told him my world had just been turned upside down. He never really settled, he said, his voice softening. He always talked about you, you know. Right up to the end. He said you were his greatest design. There was another long pause. His attorney is a man named Mr. Harrison. He's in Denver. Maya, you really need to call him. I sat in that noisy cafe, long after the call ended. My father was gone. He'd been gone this whole time, and his lawyers were searching for me. And suddenly it was all crystal clear. Leo's weird questions about the hotel industry, the brutal fight he started over nothing, the money vanishing the second I was out the door. Leo didn't just have a hunch. Leo knew. He'd discovered my father died, probably through some industry newswire or a public notice. Been waiting, planning this whole thing. The moment I told him I was pregnant, making a quiet exit. Impossible, he lit the fuse. That was the thing that broke my heart. Not the affair. Not being kicked out. It was knowing my husband had been carefully planning to destroy me for an inheritance. I didn't even have, yet. I found Mr. Harrison's law firm in Denver and placed the call. His assistant put me on hold. When he finally came on the line, his voice was formal but laced with relief. "Ms. Vance," he said, "I am incredibly glad you called. We have an urgent matter regarding the estate of Richard Vance. You are the primary beneficiary." "How primary?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The estate is currently valued at $92 million, he said, "but there is a very specific condition you must meet." 92 million. I just stared into my cold cup of tea, watching the lemon slice float. The entire world just seemed to stop. Mr. Harrison explained the clause. My father had put his assets into a trust. To inherit, I had to personally travel to his flagship hotel in Denver within 90 days of being notified to identify a specific architectural detail and prove I was who I said I was. Mr. Harrison explained that my father was always a guarded, eccentric man. He wrote that clause into his will for this very reason, to prevent anyone but me from successfully making a claim. He knew I was the only person alive who would know what he was referring to. He updated the trust about 18 months ago, Mr. Harrison said. You were always in it. But this final version significantly increased the value after he sold off a portfolio of older properties. Was this trust a matter of public record? I asked. There was a short silence. The existence of a trust becomes discoverable through probate court filings. Contents went public, but a person with enough resources and motivation could have confirmed it existed. Mr. Harrison paused. Is there some reason? You're asking? Yes, I said, there is. I told him everything about Leo, the timing of the fight, the money that disappeared from our accounts, the night he threw me out. Mr. Harrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, Mrs. Vance, your attorney needs to immediately file to have any inheritance designated as separate, non-marital property. Given that you are still married, this is absolutely critical. I know. I told him my lawyer and I already discussed it this morning. Excellent, he said. I flew to Denver a few days later, back in Boston, miss. Albright had already won an emergency freeze on our assets. She also served Leo notice, forcing him to let me back into the brownstone to get my things. A police escort met me at the door. Leo was there. He just stood in the doorway of his study, watching me pack my personal life into cardboard boxes with a dead flat stare. I had never seen before. His mother, Beatrice, was sitting on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, tracking my every move. Beatrice Vance was 73, impossibly elegant, with silver hair styled in a perfect chignon. She had the calm, serene smile of a person who uses politeness like a scalpel. She had never wanted Leo to marry me. I knew it from our first meeting, though she never said a word. It was in the small cuts, the way she'd ask about my little building projects with a tone of faint amusement, the way she always took Leo's side in any disagreement. She was, I had long suspected, the true engine of his ambition. Leo wasn't stupid, but he needed a woman to tell him what to want. Beatrice had been doing that his entire life. As I carried the last box out, she finally spoke. You're making a terrible mistake, Maya, she said, her voice soft as velvet, but just as heavy. I hoisted the box onto my shoulder and walked out without a word. I signed the documents in a Denver high-rise the following Tuesday. My father's estate lawyer had an office with a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. His paralegal offered me water, with the kind of gentle sadness people reserve for the newly rich. The whole process took hours, verifications, signatures, and legal explanations. The lawyer reviewed every single clause. The money would arrive in trusts, starting with an initial transfer of $9 million the following week. Back in Boston by Thursday. That evening, a blocked number buzzed my phone. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a man, his voice polished and friendly. Maya, I'm a friend of Leah's. This is just some friendly advice. Women in your position can find their professional lives get complicated. Reputations are fragile things for an architect. A good name is everything, right? It would be a shame to see yours tarnished. He let the threat hang in the air. You just need to think about whether this fight is really worth what it's going to cost you. I was standing in my friend Chloe's guest room, where I'd been staying, and just stared at the phone, wondering how broken he thought I was.
I am recording this, I said, my voice surprisingly level. Your name, please?
The line went dead. I immediately phoned my lawyer, Ms. Albright. She confirmed my gut feeling. A vague threat to my career, from a burner phone, but obviously from my husband mid-divorce. It was an arrogant, sloppy mistake. He'd used my private number. The call was logged. MS. Albright filed a motion for intimidation that same afternoon. Liam's lawyer called her the next morning, hoping to find a more amicable solution. Ms. Albright called me right after, and I could practically hear her smiling. Never thought you'd have a top-tier lawyer ready to go, she told me. They bet on you being scared and isolated. I know, I said. They'll just try a different tactic now. She gave me simple advice. Just take the next few days for you rest. Eat. You need to save your strength for the fight ahead. And I did for 3 days. I did almost nothing. I took long walks along the Puget Sound, grabbed clam chowder from a stall near Chloe's place, and started a book I'd meant to read for years. I let my body do its work, protecting the little life I was carrying. My first prenatal scan, booked under the new insurance Ms. Albright's team had secured for me, was that Friday. Solid, racing heartbeat. Everything looked perfect. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage after, and a wave of pure relief washed over me for the first time in weeks. It didn't last long, but it was real. Their next move came that Tuesday, exactly a week after my motion was filed. Liam's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, sent a proposal for mediation. Hidden inside the real reason for the email was a settlement offer. Liam would grant a quick, uncontested divorce, unfreeze our bank accounts, and waive any claim to my family's coffee business inheritance. In return, I had to withdraw. Intimidation motion, accept a laughable fraction of our shared assets, and sign a non-disclosure agreement so tight it was practically suffocating. I read it over twice, then called MS. Albright. He buying your silence, she said instantly. The Indar gives it away. This isn't about the money. It's about what you know. About him hiring a firm to value my father's company before he even kicked me out, I said. Exactly. That a premeditated financial plot that would destroy his reputation as a venture capitalist if it ever got out. He works in high-stakes tech investments. His entire brand is built on trust. She paused. And frankly, Ella, this offer is insulting. Your legal claim to the marital property, considering the length of your marriage and his behaviour, is worth so much more. So we say no, I said. We say no, she confirmed. And we don't make a counteroffer. It shows you not just looking for a payday, you looking for justice. So that's what we did. I'll admit for a second I was tempted. There's a version of me pregnant, exhausted, living in my friend's spare room who sees that number and thinks, just take the money, sign the papers, and just disappear. I let myself think about it for an hour. On Chloe's couch, drinking peppermint tea, while the Seattle rain tapped on the glass. Then I pushed it away, because that money wasn't meant to give me a new beginning. It was meant to protect Liam, and I had a strong feeling it was really about protecting Eleanor, his mother. Someone had to do the painstaking research on my family's business, and Liam, for all his drive, wasn't the detail-oriented type. He was a shark, all about big, aggressive moves. But digging into his wife's family finances without her knowledge, that required someone Liam trusted completely. Someone with the time, the motivation, and zero conscience. His mother was there when I packed my bags, just watching me with those cold, calculating eyes on a hunch. I grabbed an old tablet Liam had left behind. I powered it on, and his old email account started syncing. And there it was, an email chain with a wealth management firm. Inside were plans for a discrete asset valuation of my family's company. The final report was dated 3 weeks before my father's funeral, and the invoice was paid from an account I knew. It was Eleanor's. That was the smoking gun. Chloe has been my rock since we met in a design history class back in college, bonding over a shared love for Art Deco and a hatred for bad typography. She's logical, fiercely funny, and her loyalty is shown in deeds, not words. She gave me a key to her apartment hours after I first called her in tears. No questions asked, just as long as you need that night. She got home from her restaurant and found me at her dining table, surrounded by a mountain of legal documents. She just started making risotto. She poured herself wine and me some water. She sat down and said, "Okay, tell me from the start." And I told her everything: the inheritance, the settlement, the threat, and the P. I report I'd just discovered. Chloe heard the entire story, her eyes fixed on mine without interrupting once. When I finished, she took a thoughtful bite of risotto. "So, his mother knew exactly what your inheritance was worth, before Liam even threw you out." I just nodded, certain of it. The whole point was to kick you out before the money came through so he could claim half. But your father's will was airtight. It named you alone. So their brilliant scheme was legally dead on arrival. "I know," I said. "I think they totally misjudged how it was set up. They must have thought it was a small inheritance, not the full sale of the company. They had no idea of the real number. So they panicked," Chloe said. "I think they did. I learned I was pregnant," I added, "which completely destroyed their timeline. And Liam did something very fast and very stupid." Chloe took another sip of wine. "So, what's the next step? What do you need from me?" "I might need you to be a witness," I said. "Someone who can testify about my emotional state when I got here. The exact date I showed up, and what I told you is going to be a critical piece of my case." "Done," she said, without a moment's hesitation. I just looked at her, overcome with a gratitude that left me speechless. Outside, the rain had eased up. Seattle has this gentle amber glow after a storm, a light that seems to offer a bit of grace to people who are exhausted to their very bones. "Thank you," I told her. Just brushed it off. "Don't thank me yet." In some cold, minimalist mansion across town, Liam and his mother Eleanor were definitely planning their next move. I could almost feel their eyes on me. I knew it wouldn't be another formal letter from their lawyer. I was right. Their move came on a Sunday, but it wasn't a team effort. Eleanor came by herself, which I knew was a strategic choice. She called Chloe's phone a number positive. I never gave her, which means Liam must have tracked it down. She called around 10 in the morning, asking if she could possibly drop by for a chat. She used the word possibly, a word I'd never heard from her. I took a deep breath, and then I said yes. Saying no accomplished nothing. But saying yes, that might just get me something. I arrived at 11, holding a small box of macarons from a ridiculously expensive bakery. The whole act was so perfectly staged to make her seem like a concerned, gentle woman. It was almost laughable. She sat on closed sofa, politely declined a glass of water, and scanned the apartment with a quick, judgmental glance. "I just want to say how deeply sorry I am," she began, on Liam's behalf, for how all of this has played out. I sat in the armchair across from her and said nothing. "He was simply overwhelmed," she continued. "The pressure at his new firm has been unbelievable, and when you told him about the baby, he didn't react well. He knows that. He feels absolutely awful about it." She folded her manicured hands in her lap. "Ella, this is such a terrible mistake. You and Liam have a real life together. 7 years, a baby coming." The words just dangled in the air. A child needs 2 parents, a stable family. You must consider what a nasty divorce will do to this baby. And there it was, wasn't it? The quiet little threat. "And my family's trust," I added. I saw something flicker in her eyes. "That is a family issue," she said, her voice turning hard as glass. "It has no bearing on your marriage." "Eleanor," I asked, "who called my family's wealth manager pretending to be me last month?" And for a split second, her flawless composure finally cracked. It was there for a moment and then gone, instantly controlled. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "Oh, I'm pretty sure you do." She pulled herself together, the concerned mother-in-law mask slipping perfectly back into place. "Ella, as this child's grandmother, I am pleading with you to think about what you are throwing away. Liam wants to fix this. He has agreed to go to therapy. He wants to rebuild your trust. He just needs me to make this problem go away. It's hurting his reputation, his new venture. He wants me to drop the harassment motion," I stated, my voice flat, and sign an ender. "He wants his family back together," she insisted. I just stared at her, 68, with perfect silver hair and a box of $5 macarons on the coffee table. The woman operated on the principle that charm was currency and patience was a weapon. The easiest way to win was to make your opponent look unhinged. "Catherine," I said, "I know about the offshore accounts. I know you looked into my grandfather's entire architectural portfolio. And I know about the call to his wealth manager. My lawyer knows everything too. A judge has already frozen the funds. Julian tried to siphon off, I stood. Tell Julian the answer is no. It was always going to be no. And if anyone in your family contacts my brother or my doctor again, we'll have a restraining order by the end of the week." Catherine's smile didn't just vanish, it was deleted. It's like a switch was flipped. The face beneath was pure marble, cold, smooth, and unforgiving. "You're making a formidable enemy, you know," she said. "I already have one," I replied. "I just prefer to know who I'm actually up against." She stood, picked up her pastries, and walked to the door. Right before leaving, she glanced back at me. "This isn't a threat, Amelia. It's a statement of fact," she said, her voice hollow. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed," and then she was gone. Standing there in my friend Clara's kitchen, my hands began to tremble. It wasn't just fear. It's the price your body pays for pretending to be brave. That moment, the adrenaline wears off and the stress finally catches up. I was terrified, absolutely and completely terrified. Catherine Sterling didn't make idle threats. She had the money, the influence, and decades of experience in emotional warfare. She raised Julian after all. She knows precisely where a person's breaking point is and how to apply pressure. But something else was starting to kick in too. The fear wasn't making me want to hide. It was sharpening my resolve to see this through. It reminded me of something my father, an architect, always used to say. Amelia, buildings don't collapse because of one storm. They collapse because of a flaw in the foundation. Talking about structures, of course, but I finally understood his point. My foundations were stronger than Julian, or his mother could ever imagine. I called my lawyer in Ms. Davies and told her Catherine had paid me a visit. I'd recorded the whole thing on my phone. Massachusetts is a on-a-party consent state, Ms. Davies listened to the playback and said just one word golden. My next call was to my financial advisor. He confirmed the first trust transfer from my grandfather's trust was completely secure. I opened the journal where I'd been tracking every detail and wrote a new heading, "They are panicking, exploit." Then I underlined that sentence twice. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday in May. A month before, Mrs. Davies had filed a massive discovery request for bank records, emails, private messages, everything going back 3 years. Julian's lawyers fought almost every item, and the judge overruled nearly all of their objections. The digital trail told the whole story of his deception, which honestly didn't surprise me. Julian's first search for my grandfather's name, Robert Vance, was from last June. The search was on their shared home tablet, which his legal team tried to argue was inadmissible and failed. He'd researched the sale of my grandfather's firm, his real estate holdings, and a Boston law firm that specialized in exactly the kind of estate planning my grandfather used. Green's phone records, which my lawyer spent 2 brutal weeks fighting for, showed a call to my grandfather's financial advisor back in January. That was the call he'd warned me about. The records also showed 11 calls between Catherine and Julian in the 48 hours, right before he threw me out. And then we found the smoking gun and email from Julian to his sister. He wrote that he needed the Amelia situation handled before the estate lawyers could get in touch. He sent that email the Monday before our huge fight. He knew everything for days. The whole confrontation was a setup. We were in Ms. Davies' conference room for the deposition. It was the same room where Shed told me to check our joint bank accounts 6 months ago. The world was a different place now. Julian sat across from me for the first time since that awful night. He was wearing a navy suit, looking rigid and over-prepared, like a witness who'd been grilled by his own team for hours. The first half hour was pure procedure. Julian gave his rehearsed answers, saying, "I don't recall so many times it started to sound like a nervous habit." Then Mrs. Davies brought up the email, displayed it on the huge monitor in the room, and just let the words hang in the air. It was a masterstroke. Julian glanced up. I saw his jaw tighten, just for a heartbeat. But after 8 years, I could read all his signs. "Mr. Sterling, do you recognize this email? It appears to be from your account. Did you write this?" I might have. "It says you needed the Amelia situation handled. Can you please clarify what you meant by that?" His lawyer immediately objected. Miss Davies just kept going. "Mr. Sterling, prior to December 3rd, were you aware your wife was the sole heir to the Robert Vance estate?" The silence in that room seemed to drag on forever. "That a yes or a no, Mr. Sterling?" Julian's lawyer, some country club friend of his father's, put a hand on his arm. Julian was a statue. "My client declines to answer." Ms. Davies cut him right off. "On what grounds?" He already testified he had no independent assets. She was sharp as a blade. The refusal is on the record. Julian shot his lawyer a desperate look, and in that one glance, I saw his entire story just crumble. It wasn't a loud crash. It was a silent demolition. Like a foundation that cracks when a supporting beam gives way. A hairline fracture, then a shudder. He finally looked over at me, searching my face for something. I used to wonder what I would feel in this moment. Vindicated, furious. Some horrible mix of the two. But all I felt was calm. The kind of calm an architect feels when she trusts her own design. When she knows which parts were built to hold the weight. I met his gaze and held it. He was the one who looked away first. In the elevator, Ms. Davies said, "Hell, settle. It'll be over by next week." "I know," I said. The doors slid open to a brilliant July afternoon. The kind of heat that made Boston feel like summer had finally won. Ms. Davies looked at me. "How are you really doing, Amelia?" I had to actually stop and think about it. My ankles were swollen and I was bonnet-tired. I just wanted my own bed back. But for the first time in months, a different feeling was settling in. The fear was gone. "Okay," I said. "I think I'm actually truly okay." Julian settled 4 days later. He had no other move. The agreement was 30 pages long. He gave up all claims to my inheritance, acknowledging it was my separate property, and repaid the $150,000 had hidden. I got the brownstone and our main savings, and that gag order he wanted me to sign? Not a chance. I wasn't signing away my right to tell the truth. A prenatal paternity test at 14 weeks had already confirmed Julian was the father. That one ugly fact was now part of the court record. It was concrete proof that his entire story was a fabrication. I hope he read that paragraph a few times. The first wire transfer from the settlement came through on a Friday. I was at my friend Clara's apartment when the notification popped up on my phone. I just stared at the amount, unable to breathe. I texted her, "It's over." Her reply was instant. Just a glass of champagne emoji, and my name, Amelia. I called my grandfather's old business partner and said, "We won." It was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather would be so incredibly proud of you," he said. He really would. Julian signed the final divorce decree on a Tuesday. He didn't make eye contact once. Our marriage was officially finished. Driving home, stuck in traffic on the Tobin Bridge, my daughter kicked for the very first time. A quick, sharp little thump, like a secret code. "I'm here," it seemed to say, in a language only a mother could possibly know. "I know," I thought, placing a hand on my stomach. "Me too. Her name is Nora. She was born on a Monday in October. 6 pounds and 9 ounces, with her father's stormy grey eyes and what everyone calls my determined jaw. I have a gorgeous little loft now, just outside of Chicago. It gets so much more light than our old high-rise, with a studio in the back where I'm building my new business. My photography company already has a few big shoots booked. My name is on the lease. That means more to me than I can ever really say. My grandmother's inheritance gave me the freedom to start over, and I'm so grateful for it. But I've fought hard to stay focused. I still obsess over every lighting setup. I still call my brother every Sunday. David's architecture firm lost a huge city contract a month after our divorce. He had to sell a massive portion of his partnership stake. He sees our daughter, Maya, every other weekend, and we're cordial. He is her dad. Whatever he did, that one truth doesn't change. Some days the anger is still right there. A hot ember in my chest. I try to separate the betrayal from the man, and I usually fail. I haven't spoken to his sister Lauren since I found out she knew. knew about her so-called best friend Isabella the entire time. That chapter of my life is over. My best friend Jess got married last summer. I was the maid of honor, holding my daughter Maya, who cried through the entire ceremony. Jess swears she's just going to frame the audio. My grandma's old editor, Mr. Peterson, came by. He brought a box of her old photo negatives. I had never even seen. She always said, "You find the real story in the negative," Mr. Peterson told me, his voice cracking just a bit. Weeks. I just held one of those old negatives up to the light. "I know," I whispered back to her memory. "I am trying. Sometimes I just sit on my studio steps and replay it." A Tuesday afternoon in July. A press event for a new hotel David had designed. A single gut-wrenching moment, reading a plaque on a door, the Isabella Suite. It wasn't a story then. It was an earthquake, where the floor just gives way beneath your feet. But the foundation I'd built for myself held. When Maya is old enough, I'll tell her the whole story. Not as a tragedy, but as a lesson in developing film. "See, my girl," I'll say. "This is how you create an image so true it can't be denied." I've learned a single thing from this complete train wreck. It's that people who try to shrink you are just making a gamble. They're betting you'll never discover your own power. My ex-husband David was betting I was too attached to our perfect life to ever leave. His sister Lauren was betting I'd be too embarrassed to tell anyone the truth. They both lost, big time. So trust your own instincts. Write it all down. Find your Jess, your true support system, and never let somebody else write your story for you. What would you have done if that lie blew up right in your face? Let me know what you think down below. I really do read every comment, and if this can help someone else, please share it. Thank you for listening. Model.